I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, James Mabbott. James is the partner in charge of KPMG Innovation. KPMG Innovate is a dedicated innovation consulting practice that works with clients to develop strategy, business models and capabilities to drive innovation and respond to and take advantage of disruption. James and the Innovate team have worked across a range of public and private clients in the transport, financial services, telecommunications, technology, industrial and manufacturing sectors. James today will be primarily focused on artificial intelligence and the implications for real estate. And the reason why we've got James here is because forward-thinking property managers need to be abreast of and understand these big changes in technology and make sure your properties, whether they're office and the way people work, like we just heard, or industrial assets with automation and robotics, making sure that we position our portfolios to drive returns for investors over the longer term. Please welcome to the stage, James.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Steve. I think it's an interesting question, actually, when you consider the real estate and property sector, the topic of artificial intelligence, and I think sometimes innovation is not something that naturally springs to mind. A friend of mine who's worked in the sector for a long time often says to me when I'm talking about innovation, he goes, James, there's only ever been two really great innovations when you talk about property and construction, and one of those was the brick and the other one was mortar. I personally think that's a little unkind because the last 15 years, 20 years or so, we've certainly seen a lot of change, and you know, some of that has started at that consumer end when you think about things like realestate.com.au and domain.com and what they've done in terms of the consumer end of the market around finding housing, whether you're an owner or an investor from that end, through to some things that have happened more recently with the establishment of venture capital funds that are focused on the property sector, or what we call prop tech or real tech. Here in Australia, you have funds like Taronga Ventures, for example, and it coupled with the emergence of new business models. So as has been mentioned, some of those co-working type models, you think about things like WeWork, you've got Stone and Chalk here in Sydney in the fintech space, and also things like Airbnb and what that's doing, and some of the implications that has for both tenants and landlords, and the value of these assets alike as part of that. But probably more interestingly, right now today, we're on the cusp of a slightly different change, because with the Internet of Things and potential for autonomous vehicles, coupled with access to big data and this notion of intelligent automation, you get the sense that this is a sector that is on a cusp of a wave of potentially radical transformation, and the technology that's going to drive that in part will be artificial intelligence. And part of the reason for this is that when you talk about artificial intelligence, it's the I in the AI, the intelligence piece that people are fascinated with, because intelligence is something that we naturally associate with our own human condition. It's part of what actually drives our society forwards. And so this idea that in some sense you can recreate or replicate what's core to us in order to expand or augment or extend our own capabilities is something that's tremendously exciting. And that's what Sundar is referring to here with this quote. And when you put up against this some of the biggest challenges that we face, or some of the big problems to be solved, whether it be things like climate change, mobility, we heard a lot around the road network in Sydney, and transport solutions that are required. A lot of those trains that were spoken about will actually be driverless trains, and it'll be artificial intelligence that'll make that real and happen, through to things like health and housing and water and food security. It's artificial intelligence that will play a big role in a lot of that. And clearly, as part of that, there's implications for our built environment, and that's part of why this topic is of interest and important, as Steve pointed out. On the other end of that, though, there's a sense that we need to be cautious, I guess, in terms of how we embrace this. So while some see huge upside, others are observing we need to keep a focus on how do we keep the technology beneficial. Intelligent machines, in some instances, are going to be more accurate, they're going to be faster, they're going to be smarter, they're going to be safer than human labour. And that obviously has implications for jobs, for housing markets as a result of that, for workforces and workplaces as well. So there's a choice here that we need to employ in terms of how and when we use artificial intelligence, and that needs to be informed and deliberate. And so part of what I hope to do in the next 10, 15 minutes is give you an idea as to what's actually happening with artificial intelligence, what it is and what some of the building blocks are, as well as potential applications in the sector. And finally, there are some who believe that we don't actually understand the risks or the longer-term existential threats that go hand in hand with the application of the technology itself. In part, these comments actually reflect one of the strongest assets of the human condition, which is our ability to imagine particular outcomes above and beyond where we actually are today. And when it comes to artificial intelligence, that means that we're able to think of something that has cognitive abilities or an intelligence that in some sense so far surpasses what we ourselves are capable of. So this notion of a super intelligence. So I guess in those three quotes we get a sense of the hope, the hype and potentially the horror that's associated with artificial intelligence. And it's probably best to step back from that a bit and say, well, okay, where are we today? So first off, in terms of the real estate sector in the digital age, we've recently concluded one of our global CEO surveys, and a lot of the themes that came through there actually resonate with the real estate sector, and some of the things we've heard this morning, or this afternoon rather, are also in line with that. And one of those is that innovation, digital and emerging tech is moving further up the CEO's agenda. It's becoming more and more important in that sense. We've also heard discussion around the emergence of new business models. And there's an emphasis in these new business models on two things. One is the customer experience that can be driven at the front end, because that's where the differentiation is going to happen. And the other bit is what's the ultra operational efficiency that can be driven at the back end. And you think about that snapshot of the Amazon warehouse that was put up there, that is about driving that ultra efficient operational back end for an organisation. The other bit is the nature and shape of occupiers is also changing. And we saw that as well. It's great actually, the slides that Lee put up around the hub and spoke model and the implications that that has for property too. So in terms of what a good experience is for tenants, that's changing. So these agile work environments are appearing, and more there's conversation around smart housing and what that might actually present or provide. And then you've got the urban landscape itself undergoing some change. So you think about the infrastructure that's being built, a lot of that's going to be smart infrastructure. So it's going to have Internet of Thing capability embedded in it, the ability to sense and track and measure what's happening on that infrastructure. That's going to be coupled with the emergence of autonomous vehicles, the use of robotics and artificial intelligence. And together those things are actually going to shape the way space is built and the type of environment that we live and work in. And this is important because, as we've heard today, spaces really matter. The way a city works and functions, the CBD structure that we have here in Sydney is core to the types of environment that we'll have in our attractiveness as a global city, and whether or not we'll be able to compete for investment capital and what that means for the value of the properties that are here. Spaces also matter because they will drive the innovation that we get access to, the jobs that we have, the quality of life that we live, which in turn ties back to things like the type of health and lifestyle experience that we expect from the environment within which we work and play. So in terms of artificial intelligence itself, a simpler way to think of it is that it's the development of computer systems that perform tasks that normally require human intelligence. So think about things like image recognition, the ability to recognise what an object is, or to recognise language and understand it, to have a conversation and to communicate. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about computer systems that can comprehend, can learn, and as a result of that, assist in decision making. The major difference to traditional computer systems is that these systems are trained, they're not programmed. They learn. And decision making is not binary, but it's probabilistic in terms of its outcomes. And it's for this reason, the ability to replicate the human condition, to provide us with the ability to extend and augment our own ability to make decisions, that there's so much investment flowing into this space. And we've seen that right across the spectrum, whether they be startup through to larger, more established organisations as well. And you think about some of the largest companies today IBM, Microsoft, Amazon, Google and Facebook, all of those organisations are pursuing an artificial intelligence agenda. And part of the reason for doing so is they want to drive competitive advantage. Right? So there's how do you make yourself more efficient than the next person? How do you provide a better experience? How can you be more personalised in terms of the services you provide? It's that operational efficiency side at the other end. Part of it's around the problem solving and the things they actually need to be able to deliver and the types of research that they want to engage in as well. And finally, it's because there's an ever-increasing view of the size of this market and the value that might actually be able to be tapped into and the types of applications and services that can be provided that's attracting people into it. And to get that right means you need to have the right kind of building blocks in place. So there's big aspirations, there's big market potential, there's a lot of hype around what artificial intelligence may or may not be. And so this notion of applying advanced analytics and algorithms to train computers to use data from a wide variety of sources to solve problems in order to automate, accelerate and enhance insights fundamental to it. And to get that right, you need this holy trinity to come together, this combination of data. So there's this expression in the 21st century, we talk about data as being the new oil. And when we talk about artificial intelligence, data is very much the fuel that will drive those systems. And this isn't just what we might normally understand to be data in databases such as you might find in a customer relationship management system or an ERP system within an enterprise. Here we're talking about unstructured data as well. So providing access to things like emails, to customer conversations, to SMS messages, to video, to images, to text. Because when you do that and combine it with those tools, which is the second building block, the algorithms and technology that you need, you can actually drive the learning outcomes. So the bigger the sample set you provide to the system in terms of the data, the better the accuracy you're going to drive at the other end in terms of those probabilistic outcomes that you get from these systems. And finally, you need humans in the loop. I think this is the really interesting bit because we often talk about artificial intelligence as if in some sense it's going to replace and take over everything that we do. But to make these systems effective and efficient and actually deliver on organisational outcomes, you have to have people involved. You need people to train. You need people to say, yes, you got that right or you got it wrong. And part of the reason for this is that when you don't, things can go horribly wrong because you don't realise value when you don't have the human in the loop. For example, Google with their photo tagging algorithm when it was first released actually identified African Americans as gorillas. And that was due to the images they'd trained the system on. Microsoft with their Taybot, when it was released into the market, started to interact with various right-wing groups in the US and as a result of that learnt to make racist, sexist and misogynist comments. So it didn't actually perform the function it was intended to do. And Apple's iPhone face recognition software, when it was released, performed very poorly on a key target market for Apple, which is actually young Chinese females. And when you go back and you look at how that application was trained by being exposed to photos of white middle-aged men. So it's kind of not surprising it couldn't identify young Chinese females. So the point of this is that for artificial intelligence to be effective and work, you have to have people in the loop. There needs to be someone providing oversight, and there needs to be someone providing information and feedback to the system to say, yes, you got that right or you got it wrong. It's much like dealing with your children, except that these systems will listen to you. That's the key difference. And when we get that, and it is important because there are bigger impacts that sit around that in terms of things like privacy, whether or not you apply these sorts of systems in the criminal justice space, implications for democracy, as we've seen with the Facebook Cambridge Analytica side of things, and then also from a human rights perspective too. So what I'd like to do now, I guess, is dive into some solutions to give you a sense of what's actually happening today. And the first one we're going to start with is a video demonstration where you'll see a chatbot interacting with a human agent. It actually comes from within the firm. And the reason I picked this in part is because whenever you look at any study that talks about the future of work and jobs and who's going to be doing what, professions such as accounting and law are often at the top of the list to be automated. So I'd give you a sense as to where that's actually at. Probably the more interesting side of this is you'll see natural language processing in action You'll see that chat interface, and you'll see the delivery of unstructured data as we go through it as well. So the system will be performing those elements of comprehend, learn, and decide as part of that process as well. Right, so let's see if this will play. Maybe I might get the guys down the back to press play for us.
Hi, welcome to KPMG Accounting Advice Wizard. Who am I speaking with?
So Peter's just going to type in his name. He said hello. That turns
Hi
the
Peter,
system on.
what can I help you with today?
So he's now saying I need some help with a leasing standard.
Sure, I can definitely help you with that. I will ask you a series of questions to determine if this is the right standard. Is that okay?
And as it does that, it's presenting some thought leadership on the left-hand side, which Peter can have a look at and say, look, is this of interest to me? Is this thing going to be able to help me?
Is the lease to explore for minerals, oil, natural gas and similar non-regenerative resources?
So now the bot's trying to work out what sort of lease standard he's actually interested in.
For more information about natural resources, please refer to the information search window on the right. So now, is the lease related to a natural resource?
Because he said, I wasn't sure, I don't know if that's what I'm interested in or not. So it's providing him with information. So this is part of that learning piece, right?
Is the lease of a biological asset?
And again, he gives an ambiguous answer, maybe. So it's going to say,
Peter, please refer to the information search window on the right for more information about biological assets. So now, is the lease of a biological asset?
and of course it's not, right? But
Is the arrangement with the scope of service concession arrangements?
we might pause it there. But what you can see there, look, it's slightly robotic, looks a bit clumsy in some sense, but that accounting technical insight spot there is guiding that person through the application of a new leasing standard, right? And it's engaging in a dialogue with the user, right? Where it's asking questions, seeking clarification. So that's part of that learning process. And as Peter's answering those questions, you can see how it doesn't matter whether he's saying no, nope, maybe, not sure. It's recognising definitive answers and ones which are ambiguous, and then saying, look, here's some information that might help you seek clarity around that, right? Which actually helps drive that conversation forwards. And at the end of that process there, what actually happens is he ends up at a point in time where he can actually engage with a human agent to get more information if that's what he requires. So you can see how those elements start to come together in terms of driving that forwards. And you can see how important it is to actually have a person in the loop to provide feedback as to what standards actually make sense in and around that. So we'll now move to a case study out of the real estate or property sector. So here we have Maidan Mall in the United Arab Emirates. So this is an example of where you can get smarter, cheaper, faster, more accurate outcomes. And you can see there that they're going to drive $500 million in OPEX savings through the application of artificial intelligence coupled with the use of IoT. The other bit that they've done with this mall is they've created what's known as a digital twin. And that digital twin allows you to model every single aspect of the performance of the mall, whether it be from power, security, staffing levels, customer journeys, temperature, everything throughout it, the facilities management. And off the back of that, you can make real-time decisions around where you deploy resources and how you actually use them in the environment. And the types of outcome that's generating in this environment is we're talking things like a 40% power saving, 20% reduction in cleaning costs, 25% reduction in staffing costs, 20% off security and 20% off facilities management, which is pretty impressive, right? And you go, that's exciting, but in some senses, this side of things really is a zero-sum game because as we all drive towards operational efficiency, we get similar sorts of outcomes. And the bit that's probably more exciting is what happens on the front end here, which is really driving this mega VIP customer experience side of things. Because what this means is that they're able to design these end-to-end customer journeys as part of the experience, right? So they're trying to make this like a lifestyle outcome for people who come to the mall. Everything from pre-arrival through to departure is shaped and guided And artificial intelligence plays a role at every step, right through from the use of virtual assistants to assist with booking, your itinerary development, right through to transportation, the use of smart parking environments and wayfinding throughout the mall. They can do personalised individual journeys. They can even, in some parts of the mall, control things like light and temperature to be personalised for the individuals who are in that space, so they can differentiate at that end. You've got facial recognition software which helps with security and access and changes the experience that people might go through in terms of the types of boutiques that they enter or the products and services that they engage with. And sitting behind all of this, you've got a platform that's capturing all the information and analysing all that traffic to actually look at the customer behaviour and then optimise future services that are provided. So you get a sense that this is a very different experience, and this shows you how that application of artificial intelligence, that combination into the property sector, can actually provide you with a premium asset in some senses that's able to drive greater value for investors. And that is one of the key things here, I think, that's important to focus on, is that these smarter properties will be able to drive a premium. Right? You think about developments like Barangaroo and those sorts of environments. We've heard about the Green Star ratings today. This will become as important in some senses in terms of driving differentiation across properties from that experience. And there are a number of different ways in which this will play out in the sector. So one of those is in terms of the trading algorithms themselves. And I've got an example in a moment we can have a look at, where you can see how you might be able to use artificial intelligence to capture data to provide a different type of information, whether that be to investors, developers or tenants around the value of a property. Think about some of the transaction document analysis. So when you receive things like your IMs, being able to pass that through an AI device that can give you analysis or insight in seconds that might take you hours to arrive at yourself from that perspective. We've seen an example of some of those intelligent retail environments, and we'll share a couple of others of those to help drive differentiation in the sector, and how you might also use non-human labour to drive engagement as well. So in terms of the investment side of things, this actually comes from a tool that we built for a client in London who was looking to open up some new restaurant stores in the heart of London and was trying to work out how they could differentiate between properties that were available. And they had access to information like, well, this is what the rent's going to be charged, and they had their historical performance. So what we did was built an engine that captured over 4,300 different signals across things like climate, crime, competition, transportation and demographics, to provide a model that gave them a view on what the actual value of the asset would be in terms of the income that it would be able to drive, and compare that across different shop fronts on the same street presence. So you've got Piccadilly Circus here. So suddenly the client is in a position where they can go, okay, I can now make a decision as to whether or not I take something that used to be a Boots shop front or I take the bank shop front, because I've got real information here that can help me understand things like proximity to transportation, through to financial services, through the types of traffic, foot traffic that goes past, the demographics of those people, the climate, the street exposure I get, through to the types and frequency of crime in the area as well, that allows me to make these decisions. The other interesting thing that you can do with this then is look at your historical properties and say, well, are they achieving the performance benchmarks that I expect they should be achieving when I look at this information for where they are too? So you can see how this begins to change the dynamic in terms of those sorts of decisions. The other piece that we've spoken about is driving these new customer experiences, and it's interesting to hear the discussion around the retail environment and what online e-commerce potentially means. And I think when you look offshore at some of the examples there, you begin to see this, I was going to say weird, but this is Japan, and Japan has an ageing population, and you're beginning to see new forms of labour in stores there, such as things like the Pepper robot here, which was developed by SoftBank Group. And SoftBank actually used Pepper because it is able to understand and react to human emotion. So one of the roles that Pepper performs in the store is to welcome people, right? Provides information to people. It also provides them with amusement. And so successful as Pepper been, they're actually starting to use Pepper in people's homes as a companion in some senses as well. Right? So it gives you a sense of how that online and the bricks and mortar world is actually starting to come together and provide a differentiated experience, because this is where the competitive differentiation is. It's not in the back end side of things, it's in the front end where you're actually going to be able to drive that. The final one we'll touch on is just Amazon Go, and the reason Amazon Go is interesting is because this is the invisible robot, right? This is intelligent cameras in the store that track your movement. When you take something off the shelf and put it in your bag, it enters your shopping cart. When you take it out of your bag and put it back on the shelf, it leaves your online shopping cart. When you leave the store, the transaction is affected, right? And you go, that's kind of, it's interesting because Amazon have built themselves up as this online retail e-commerce behemoth, and here they are participating in the retail bricks and mortar shopfront world. So again, it's about that customer differentiation. It's about the experience that you can deliver and how that has potential to reshape and repurpose the value of these types of assets as well. So the important thing, I think, to take away out of this is this quote here, and that is that whilst we talk about these things as if they're to come, the reality is there are examples of this in the market today. And by looking at those examples that are around today, we can begin to project and get a sense of what that future is going to look like. And the important thing is how we bring together that holy trinity of data through to the tools around the learning and having people involved to drive the right outcomes from that for the property sector. And with that, thank you.